I said I'll do it for 1 year, and I ended up doing it for 18 years. Kevin mentioned I did 29 different sports. Some of those you wouldn't even recognize. Shark taggings, wrist wrestlings, battle of the NFL, cheerleaders.
You got to be a constant learner because you don't know if what you've learned today is going to be relevant.
I'm 96 years old and I'm too dumb to retire. I want to continue to do things. You don't quit, you keep right on going.
I'm not retired. I'm redirected.
Some conversations were never meant to be recorded. This one was. Dick Schultz, University of Iowa basketball coach, ran the NCAA, and led the United States Olympic Committee. Kevin Crampton, author of Tuned, former CEO, who has led billion-dollar deals around the globe and credits Dick as his greatest mentor. Welcome to Tuned Talks.
Gary Bender, welcome to Toon Talks. Just to give a little bit of Gary's bio, Gary spent 47 years as a radio TV sportscaster, starting out in small radio stations in Kansas. He ended up at the network working for CBS, ABC, Turner Sports, and broadcasting 29 different sports. He called such events as Michael Jordan's game-winning shot for North Carolina versus Georgetown in the 1982 Final Four, the shot heard around the world as North Carolina State upset number 1 ranked Houston, and the emotional falls of Dan Jansen in speed skating at the 1988 Winter Olympics. A member of the Kansas Hall of Fame, Gary received his master's degree at the University of Kansas after a brief stint playing football at Wichita State University. He and his wife, Linda, and I think this is still true, have celebrated their 62nd wedding anniversary. They have 2 sons, Trey and Brett, and are blessed with 3 grandchildren, Landry, Garrett, and Addison. Gary, welcome to Toon Talks.
Kevin, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Gary, let's do a little bit of reminiscing. I want to see how good your memory is. Do you remember the first time we met each other?
Wow. I'm not real sure, Dick.
Well, I'll help you out a little bit. I was the basketball coach at the University of Iowa, and the Big Ten was the first major conference to sign a season-long television contract. And as I recall, I think it was at NBC. And the first game telecast was at Iowa, and you did the play-by-play.
I remember we got the contract in 1982. That was a big one for us. You were at the NCAA at that time. I had known you at Iowa. And of course, you had that undefeated Iowa team that you coached. So we've had many, many times together on the golf courses with different organizations. You've had a great influence on me, Coach. I really am glad to be able to come on the show with you.
Well, maybe you're the only one I've been successful with. But we had a lot of fun on the golf course, both when I came to the Olympics. At that time, you were living in Colorado Springs, which was a pleasant surprise because at least I knew one person that lived here. And we had 2 other people that we were involved with, and we almost had a weekly golf game for a good number of years. And that was a lot of fun. And as we switched partners, we heard a lot of different golf stories.
Well, I just remember that we had this group that was very forgiving for me because I wasn't a very good golfer. I was left-handed. You were a good one. We had another guy who was really good, and then I think 2 of us were just kind of hanging on to stay with you. We were playing at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs, one of the finest courses, I think, in the country. I probably didn't deserve to get to play that.
Well, that lasted a couple years, and then you made the move back to Phoenix because you were doing at that time all the Suns basketball games. So tell us a little bit about that experience and the adjustments you had to make in moving back there?
Well, Jerry Colangelo, who's a good friend of yours and mine, came to me one time and he says, Gary, I know you're working at the network, but we want you to start doing the home games for the Suns. And I said, well, I don't know if I can get clearance to do that, but I did. And I said, I'll do it for 1 year, and I ended up doing it for 18 years. And it was a great time coming back to the Suns because that was when they had their team that got to the finals in 1983, eventually losing to Michael Jordan and the Bulls.
Yeah, that was had to be great. And of course, you have what's one of your most interesting stories when you were doing the Suns games, because you were involved with a lot of the great players.
Well, I just remember that I followed a lot of Michael Jordan. I had done the 82 NCAA championship game when Jordan hit the shot that beat Georgetown. And so we developed a friendship through the years, and I was privileged to have him come over before every game. We'd visit for a while, and I think he's the greatest player that ever stepped on a court. And so the Suns at that time were really good. We'd never won it. The Suns still have never won an NBA championship. I was sitting with Jerry Colangelo at the ballpark when John Paxson hit the three-pointer in Game 6 of 93, and that ended our chances.
Wow, that was something else. Well, I know you and Jerry had a great relationship, and as I've had with Jerry, and we're gonna do Jerry again with one of these podcasts in the near future. So it'll be interesting to tie those things together. There's one area you're way ahead of me in, you and Kevin both. Kevin has written a book about his life, and you've written 2 books. I haven't even gotten around to writing an outline or a memoir. So you guys are really ahead of me about
Well, you should write a book. You've
Yeah,
got a
you've
lot
had
of
a
books
lot.
in your deck. I would read them in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like to tell the stories. I don't like to take time to write them down or do something like that. And Gary, there's one thing that I want to talk about because it's been important in my life and it's important in your life, is your spiritual life. And I believe you and Linda are having a Bible study in your home, and you're doing a lot in the Scottsdale and Phoenix area now with speaking and teaching. So tell us a little bit.
Well, Dick, I teach a Sunday school class quite often. I'm involved at a couple of universities where I go out and visit with them. What has happened is that through the years, I've found that my broadcasting career, I could take across the aisle and use in teaching the Word. In other words, what kids who are a lot younger than I am, I can transition because I tell stories of the Michael Jordan shot, for instance, and they can identify with me, even though they probably weren't even born when I did that game. And so I've been able to use stories to lead into what I think is very serious spiritual, decisions they need to make. Some of the things hopefully it could change their life. And so I have transitioned into now not broadcasting games. I'm not worried about identifying a wide receiver who caught the ball, but I'm really trying to successfully handle the Word of God.
That's great. What about your home Bible study?
Well, we've had a home Bible study for years, and it's a couples study. In fact, I have a couple of pastors in it, believe it or not, and we all take turns teaching it. The fellowship, praying for each other, being able to support each other in ways that you probably wouldn't because you wouldn't invest as much time, but we get to know each other and we know what the challenges are in life, and it's a privilege. When I say I pray for somebody, I pray for them. I don't just flippantly say that. I really follow through.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Hey, Gary, in your book, I'll give it a plug, Beyond the Call, great book. You're talking about the Jim Valvano kind of miraculous experience, one of the biggest sports underdogs ever. And you were interviewing him at the end, and he made a comment that he said, this is quoting Jim, God must love ordinary people. And then he went on to say, but God allows ordinary people to sometimes experience extraordinary things. You got a lot of young people, especially. I mentor a lot of entrepreneurial type folks, and they're dealing with this situation where they're trying to understand their journey and the things that they should be thinking about. I think some of the advice of Jim here, Jim Valvano, is pretty profound. Maybe you can give me your take.
Well, it really spoke to me, Kevin, because my background is very, very ordinary. I grew up on a farm on the Colorado-Kansas line. I was 12 years old, and I absolutely was 40 miles from the nearest town, and I ended up making up ball games on a tractor. I'd sing the national anthem. I did all the commercials, and it gave me a career, even though I was in the worst place I thought I could live at that time. And so I was this very ordinary person who went from a tractor to the network, who worked with some of the giants of the business. I'm kind of the poster boy for, being able to go as far as I did in the network. Bob Costas, a good friend of mine, one time said, now, where did you grow up? And I pointed to this town in western Kansas. And remember, he turned to me and said, how in the world did anybody come from there and get into the network? So I really had that sense of being a very ordinary person. And when Jim said that to me, it spoke volumes to me, that God had taken this ordinary person and had allowed me to experience those extraordinary things. I ended up working with the best of the best. And I look back at that as being such a blessing.
That's a great story. That's one I didn't know about, and it's good to hear that, because you and I have a similarity. I think I grew up in a small town of 750. There were 16 in my graduating class, and I was the only one that went on. And so a lot of people probably thought, how did somebody grown up in Kellogg do the things that you did? And it's just because, it took me a few years, but I finally figured out that all the things I was allowed to do was all part of God's plan. He gave me those experiences of running $2 billion companies, and the experiences that I came from there gave me the ability later on, while I was doing consulting work, to work with CEOs, both in the U.S. and overseas, and be effective at it. And it was strictly a part of his plan to train me to do what I finally
Dick, I couldn't agree more. I look at the sovereignty of God in my life. I got to the network. I had a guy call me one time, and he says, Gary, we understand you might be network quality. Can you send me a tape? And I sent him a tape. He called me back and says, CBS has hired you. And I said, wait a minute, who are you? He said, I'm an agent. And he said, what had happened, he was in a New York delicatessen meeting with the president of CBS. You remember him, Bob Wessler. And Bob got up to leave, and as he was leaving, he turned to this agent and he said, hey, Bob, he said, we just found out Jack Buck is leaving to go to NBC. Do you know of any young guy out there that might be network quality? And a man from an adjacent table in that delicatessen got up, came over, and said to them, I know somebody that you should hire. They said, well, who are you? He says, this is Alan LaBelle. I'm the producer of the Big Ten Network, and I'd like to recommend Gary Bender. And that's how I got to the network. You don't think that isn't humbling? I mean, somebody in an adjacent table. I wanted to get to the network in a desperate way, and nothing was happening. And all of a sudden, there I was.
I mean, that really speaks to, there's this combination of things in life where there's a spiritual element, and my favorite scripture is Proverbs 16:9. In a heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord directs his steps. And then as you look back, you can see the divine intervention. But similarly, and you talk about this in your book, how important it is to be prepared for the opportunity.
I'm glad you brought that up. John Wooden was one of my heroes. Dick, of course, knew him very well as a coach. And he had just retired from UCLA, and I was doing a game in Poly Pavilion one time, and we're getting ready to go on the air, and he comes over and wants to talk to me. And he says, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "Yes, Coach, I know who you are." He said, "Well, I'd like to ask you a few questions." So we sat down in the stands, and he asked me, what I'd learned from the years of being in the network. And I said, "Well, John, one of the things I remember reading in your book, Coach, remember the book, Coach? You said that the failure to prepare means preparing to fail." And that's been my motto. And I worked very hard at this business. I'm a grinder. I mean, I had to really work to get where I got with the Lord's blessing. And so I found out the only thing I could control was my preparation. I couldn't control anything else. And I never wanted anybody to say, well, he wasn't prepared. And so that's what you're striving at, is to have excellence. I never took my headset off and said I nailed it, because I always said something I wish I hadn't, or wish I'd said something else. It's a consuming business, but I still continued to prepare as best I could.
Well, one similarity, Gary, that you and I have is that you and I both went through a lot of changes in our careers, moving from one process to the other, basically doing the same thing, but doing it with different groups and different political thinking and so forth. So there was a lot of adjustments to make along the way. What do you feel was the major adjustments that you made as you were traveling through your...
Well, the word that comes out is flexibility. Kevin mentioned I did 29 different sports. Some of those you wouldn't even recognize. Shark taggings, wrist wrestlings, Battle of the NFL cheerleaders, shows that were one and done. We never saw them again. But you had to really be flexible. I remember they would call me and say, "Hey, have you ever done a wrist wrestling?" "Well, no, but I think I can do it." I never said no. And I would work hard at preparing myself, being flexible. And also, your question's a good one, Dick. When I worked with the John Madden, it was a lot different than working with the Johnny Unitas. Everyone had a different way of doing what they did so well. And I had to be flexible. I had to be a good listener. One of the things I learned in this business is to listen. Some of my best interviews that I had set up ahead of time had 5 questions I wanted to ask. I just didn't even use them because of something they said in the interview that changed the whole course of where the interview was going. So flexibility, being a good listener. I was probably good for analysts because I didn't battle for airtime. I wasn't trying to dominate. I gave them room to work. And when you work with a John Madden, you got to do that.
Yeah, one of the things if I could just follow up on, Gary, you talked about being a good listener. I mean, Dick, who's been my mentor for the last, it's going on 15 years now, Dick. One of the things he does better than almost any leader I've been involved with is he's an excellent listener. The other thing that Dick and I have talked about from time to time is that we both had this overseas experience, me with Ford and living and working overseas. But you learn very quickly how important it is to find a point of connection. And you can only do that through listening. You, as a great interviewer, you must have been thinking about where can we connect on, and then you would then follow that. If I'm listening to you, how important was it to find that connection point where there might be, an interest you didn't understand or know before, or all of a sudden you uncover something where you can start to build out the relationship, or there's an opportunity here to make something much more interesting than you originally thought?
Kevin, it's a very interesting answer. I think probably I had great interest in the people. I was interested in them genuinely. I wanted to know about them. I wanted to know what made them tick. I had some of my best interviews a lot of times under pressure. And the reason those came across is because I had invested time in those people and they trusted me. You remember the Dan Jansen story when I covered the Olympics in '88, the speed skater who fell twice in his bid to get a gold medal?
Right.
His sister had died previous to the Calgary event. And I was working with Haden at the time, who was the best speed skater of all time. And so after he fell the second time, Rune Arledge, this was at ABC, said, you got to interview him. In deference to the death of his sister, we have not interviewed him. So I go running down. It was an indoor facility, and I was headed down to the interview room, and a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman said, you can't come through here. I said, what? He says, you can't come through here. I said, well, I'm with ABC. I have all these credentials. He said, you better not try to break through or I'll call for reinforcements. So I went outside the arena, ran through the snow, and went up the back because I knew there was a furnace room that I could get through to avoid this Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman, get to the interview room, and talk to Dan Jansen. I barely made it. No one knew I was out there. I remember praying out there, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to go for this. I got there. I sat down. Jim McKay threw it to me. He says, here's Gary Bender with Dan Jansen. And I was still catching my breath. He was in tears. I was in tears, but we had invested time previous to that, and it might have been the finest interview I ever had.
Now, you've had a lot of, so in your book, you talk about overcoming your circumstances. And one of the great challenges people have is they face various challenges. And how did you approach, what was your approach when you were facing these kinds of?
Well, it started in my first year at the network, really. I did the Hail Mary pass when Roger Staubach threw the touchdown pass to Drew Pearson to beat the Vikings. There were a lot of things that happened behind the scenes that day, and this started my faith journey and how I can handle disappointment. What had happened, you remember, was somebody threw a bottle out of the stands, and Johnny Unitas was working with me, and he said, I think we're going to have to put moats up around our football field. And I remember the producer saying, shut up, Johnny. And then after it was over, Johnny coming up, grabbing me by my arm with a death-like grip saying, don't let anybody tell me to shut up anymore. And then I went down the parking area to get a car to get out of there, and I saw Fran Tarkenton, the quarterback for the Vikings, coming out, and he was crying. And I ran over to him. I knew him well. I said, Fran, I'm sorry you lost this game. He said, I'm not crying for that. I said, why are you crying? He says, I just found out my dad, watching the game today in Atlanta, Georgia, died of a heart attack. And I was standing there in that parking lot, and I said to myself, I don't think I can handle this kind of pressure. I don't think I can handle things like this in a negative nature. It's a long ways from the tractor in western Kansas and to have lives affected. And my faith was really predicated on verses that I had in Philippians. You know, it said, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known by God, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. And that was my rallying verse. And I found out that I had to give all of this that I was facing, all of the anxiety that I was going through, to the Lord. And again, it comes back to what we just talked about. The only thing I could control is my preparation. I couldn't control anybody throwing a bottle out of the stands and hitting a referee, or Johnny Unitas being upset about something. And it started me on this journey where I began to give it all to the Lord.
Now, we talk about a little bit, we alluded to it, the importance of personal relationships. And you've had a number of them throughout your life. Maybe you can talk a little bit about growing up. Who are the key mentors or people that impacted your life? And then the role of your partner, your wife of 62 years now. Maybe you can just walk through some of those key relationships that people that were with you and helped guide you through
Well, one of them sitting right by
various elements
Dick.
of your journey.
We were in where were we? We were in California. We were, that's right, playing golf together. So one morning I'm asleep in bed and I notice a light underneath the door. And it was really early, 5:30 in the morning. I got up and I walked out and Dick was sitting there. He had his Bible open. He was studying the Word. And I went up to Dick and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I do this every morning. I get up every morning and I get into the Word." And I started the same thing due to the fact that Dick had encouraged that. He modeled that for me. And there's not a morning goes by that I don't start the day in the Word and start my day at an entirely different level. That was a great witness to me, Dick. I think I've shared this with you before. And it started me on this journey to grow. Now, who impacted me? A lot of people impacted me. I became a Christian in a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp, a tight end with the Minnesota Vikings, Doug Kingsrider. I was the voice of the Packers. The Packers and Vikings don't even like each other. And he was spending time with me, and he took me to Revelations 3:20. And he asked me, he said, "Have you ever seen a picture of Jesus standing at the door knocking in your church?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What did you notice about that?" I said, "I'm not sure." He said, "Well, there's no doorknob on the door. You have to open up the door of your heart and go in and give your life to Christ." And that is when I became a Christian, a Viking, a Minnesota Viking of all people. But as I went through and worked through the many years of broadcasting, a lot of the broadcasters I worked with were believers. I did some games with Roger Staubach. I spent some time with Pat Haden. All of them impacted my life in different ways. But what I will tell you is I was blessed. I was blessed because it was more than just those 3.5 hours in the broadcast. It was flying together, driving together, in production meetings together, trusting each other, and developing those relationships. Of all the things I'm most proud of is the friends that I developed through the years in the broadcasting business. I wasn't, known as the greatest play-by-play announcer of all time, but I do believe that people like to work with me. I think they were understanding that I had their best interests at heart. My dad had a great influence on me. He was a professional football player. He played with Vince Lombardi, with the old Brooklyn Eagles. He was a coach just like Dick. He coached in junior college ranks. He's in the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame. He was the strongest, toughest guy I'd ever met in my life. And it goes way back on that farm when I tried to work with him and I couldn't keep up with him. He was so strong. He was so committed to everything. It gave me that idea, I need to do the same thing. And I ended up playing for him in high school. He came back into coaching, and we never lost a game. And so when I look at Dick and his coaching at Iowa, I relate that a lot to my dad's coaching in the state of Kansas.
As you've gone through your life, you've had a lot of decision points to go down one road or the other, to stay where you are, to take an opportunity. What was your process? How did you go through your decision process here? Did you include, I assume, your wife? Did you include other trusted folks as part of this, your network? How did you kind of walk through that? Did you list pros and cons of each decision? How did you?
Well, a lot of it was my wife, Linda. You mentioned we've been married 62 years. She is really my soulmate, my best friend. I trust her implicitly. She's a good listener. And we have prayed together. I've learned one thing about my walk with the Lord is when you pray aloud with your wife, you learn their heart. You understand what their concerns are and what may at that particular time really, distracting them. And so we pray together. She knows my heart. I know her heart. And she was very instrumental in me making some decisions. I had a tough time at one time in the network. I had a writer who was just hammering me. And I really struggled through that time. I prayed about it. It affected my work. I found myself really wondering if I wanted to continue. But my wife stayed there with me. She encouraged me. She strengthened me. And in my book, I dedicate my second book to her. She just encouraged me to write the second book. It had been years in the making. She said, just keep on keeping on. And sometimes, Kevin and Dick, you do. You just have to keep on keeping on, trusting that God is going to be involved in this, and he'll equip you, he will strengthen you, and he'll give you the ability to do something. I have a verse, Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That is how those kind of verses have strengthened me and kept me going.
Now, one of the things, we have a common quote in our books.
Yes.
I talk about the same.
I have
Teddy
quoted that,
Roosevelt
Kevin, in
speech.
so many speeches.
You know, the man in.
It's not the critic that counts,
Why
the
don't
man
you
who's
talk
in the arena, right?
Yeah. And it's so true. And this is a choice when I talk to young people that you have to make every day. And Dick reminds me this is a decision you have to make every day to be in the arena, to be a participant. And because it's too easy to be a spectator, especially
Yes.
today for younger people with technology, you can live your life as an avatar. So why don't you talk about the importance of being in the game, being in the arena?
Well, let me tell you, this started
and how you have to approach that every day.
I played football at Wichita University for 2 years. I was a very good high school player, but an average college player. And I got hurt. I had 2 shoulder operations, and I finally had to just quit. And I went to my dad, who, as I told you before, was so tough. It was the hardest thing I ever did, was to tell my dad, I'm not going to continue on. I just can't do this anymore. And the look on his face was awful. But I made up my mind at that time I was never going to quit again. No matter what the circumstances would be, no matter how overwhelming I might have these circumstances coming down the pike, I wasn't going to quit. And I've been able to hold true to that. That doesn't mean it's easy. There are times I've said, hey, I just don't need this. Why am I putting up with this? This is unfair. How in the world, Lord, can you allow this to happen to me? So what I would tell people who are watching and listening today is that, don't give up. Don't ever give up. And I think sometimes what we do, we're quick to do that. And once we do it, it gets easier the second time or the third time. So I have hung in there, for better or worse, trusting the Lord in all this. In other words, I find that sometimes when it's darkest and when it's the hardest for me, he brings a blessing out of it that I never could have imagined.
Yeah, Gary, I can really relate to that because it's an important part of everyone's life. You've had it from one area, I've had it from one area, but we have to remember that the challenges we get each day strengthens us if we deal with them in a positive way. If we think about them being negative, we push them off, and the problem just gets bigger and bigger. And so the Lord tests us. And we have to realize the challenges we see daily, they be coming from him, because if we take a positive attitude and work through that challenge, we're going to be a lot stronger and better off, and we're going to be setting an example for other people to do the same thing. So that's really important and really key in dealing with challenges. And we have to realize that challenges are part of life. It's not that we're being abused by somebody or some situation. It's just a part of life. Everybody has them. We're not being tempted or treated unfairly. It's just a part of life.
I couldn't agree more, Dick. In 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, that the Lord brings these things into our lives every once in a while. but he also allows us to find a way of escape. In other words, sometimes by hanging in there and not giving up, the Lord then blesses that and uses that in a way that you could never imagine.
Hey, Gary, why don't, because I asked Dick this last time about the state of affairs. Maybe you could talk about, because you have this unique view of not only the state of sports, but the state of media, which has radically changed within the sports context. So maybe you probably could talk for an hour on this, but maybe you could give us your thoughts of both of those areas. What's radical changes in media? You know, I watched the last football game on Amazon.
I'm talking about the journalism departments. I came up and got my master's degree. I was under some of the best. I mean, I had a chairman of the board who, to this day, I just thank him as to what he did in my life. But things started to change. Everyone in the educational area is not everyone, but most schools now, those professors are not the same. They don't think the same way. They become very liberal, and many of them have become woke. As an end result, you're seeing the media change. The media right now is in a disaster. I mean, it's getting to the point where I can't even watch. I can't even listen to some of the things that are being said. I pray this continually, guys, that God may put his hand of grace upon this country and change what is going on, to take all the anger away. There's so much anger out there, you can't hardly talk to anyone. The Charlie Kirk thing is a great example of that. And I think the young people, I'm hoping the young people from the 18 to 25-year-olds are starting to see that there could be a revival, that there could be a change in our country, and we could see that. I worry about my grandchildren. I worry about what they're going to inherit. I have twins, 12-year-old, and I have another one that's 25-year-old, and I just really wonder what this world's going to be like when they go out into the workforce.
I think that's a general concern. You know, I've got 6 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren, and I'm really concerned. You know, I talk to their parents of my great-grandchildren all the time about the importance that you see your children grow up knowing the Lord. And unfortunately, that's not a common practice anymore. And one of the points you made there that is so real, there's so much anger in our nation and in the world right now that it is very difficult. It's hard to talk to somebody sometime in a normal way. And they think they have to use a loud voice to get attention.
Yeah, it's intimidating, Dick. I agree with you. One of the reasons, guys, I wrote the book, the second book, is to have a legacy with my grandkids. I wanted them, maybe 10 years from now, 5 years from now, read the book and see what grandfather was thinking and what he really believed and could have impact on them. I just think that that was one of the biggest motivations I had. When I wrote that book, you know, I wrote about stories of the network, and then that's when I decided I need to add the Christian principles that followed on the heels of that: forgiveness, integrity, hope. And that's the legacy I hope they have when I'm gone.
Well, Kevin, you wrote a book almost for the same reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I was asked, Gary, to be a commencement speaker at my high school, and I had to come up with, you know, what did I learn? And the things that I learned was that I was good at navigating change from growing up in the city of Detroit during a time of tremendous change from living around the world.
Yep.
And as you think about the new technologies, the AI of the world, the fear that that's creating in the workforce, you know, how do I get prepared? And the thing that I find most interesting is when I listen to your story and Dick's story, you guys were actually preparing for the AI age because you were very good at adapting. You were very good at learning new things. You were very good at constantly taking smart risk. You were good at constantly being in the game, finishing. And I think if you look at the skill set that people are going to need going forward, you got to be a constant learner because you don't know if what you've learned today is going to be relevant. So I think you were really on the forefront when I look at Dick's career, from coaching to administration to working for the NCAA, the Olympics, and yours from, working in all sorts of various media, all sorts of different sports, learning, being able to, to communicate with sharks and from polo. I was never a good polo player either, so I empathize with you. So, but those skill sets and that approach, I think, is such a great message for what people need to have and think about to prepare themselves for the change that they're going to face. And your world has changed right now. You were trying to get into the network business. Today. You'd probably want to get into the podcast business. Look at what Joe Rogan is, his audience greater than ABC News. It's amazing how that landscape, my son who's worked in Hollywood tells me that the technology that we're using right now, we have more technology and capability than MGM had when they did Gone with the Wind. That's how powerful with the use of the new technology. And we have young guys that are tutoring us, all the folks in their 20s that are showing guys like Dick and I how to take advantage of this new technology where you can constantly have a message that you can share for perpetuity. And that's the beauty of this.
I think, let me just add, Kevin, let me add to that. That was well said. This AI thing bothers me a little bit. I don't know where the integrity comes in with AI. I don't know if they have a soul. I don't know that they're accountable to anybody as time goes on. And I had an interesting thing happen. I was asked to do the voice on this book that I just wrote. It's a lot of reading, a lot of voiceover. And I thought, I'm not sure at my age I can still do that. So I turned it to AI. And I read 2 chapters of this book you have, and I turned it over to them. They sent it back, and it wasn't even close to what I was. I had been told that AI could duplicate exactly my voice, and it didn't happen. It kind of encouraged me to think that, there's still you and I, we have an ability to influence something that AI still hasn't overcome. I'm just trying, guys, to finish well. I don't want to be a bitter old man who says, well, no one really liked what I did. They didn't give me the credit that I should have gotten. I just want to finish well, and that's what I'm trying to do. And Dick, you have done that remarkably well. And Kevin, you have too. You guys are a great encouragement to me. I need to be talking to people like you who understand basically what we're faced with.
You brought up a point, and this may be a final concluding thought for me, but one thing as a coach, you always had to teach your team, regardless of how good they were, you have to learn how to finish. And I've seen so many games lost because in the last few minutes of the game, they played not to lose instead of playing to win. And that's true in our life. We have to finish strong. And there's always plenty of opportunities for us to get cautious and say, well, I'm too old to do this, or I can't do that. We have to finish. I'm 96 years old, and I'm too dumb to retire because I still want to be sharp. I want to continue to do things. But I hope that's an example for younger people. You don't quit. You keep right on going. And consulting with a lot of CEOs, one of the major points I've made is that maybe you have mandatory retirement at 65, But don't think you're going to spend your life on the golf course, because if you do, you're going to start deteriorating. Your mind is just a muscle, has to be exercised like anything else. And if you don't keep your mind exercised, it's going to fail you, and you're going to have a miserable.
I have one thing to add to that. I'm not retired. I'm redirected. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. I know you guys are not retired. You're redirected. You've taken your skills into another arena and continue to be effective.
Gary, thanks so much. Again, Beyond the Call, a great, not only testimony, but a great read of life lessons and how to approach life, not only for your grandkids, but for even us big kids. So thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it immensely.